2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Lovely to have this gentleman back in the studio with us this morning, Professor John Fischetti, Head of School of Education at the University of Newcastle. And I'm really happy last week we spoke that your SIM card didn't run out. Have you got the bill yet for that?
No, we had just enough left on it. It's good. We're down to zero, though.
Yeah, because you called us. And
from Washington.
Yeah, so look, just leave your docket out there and someone will take care of it. Did you have a good trip?
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah?
These are all the leading researchers in education in the world assembled this year in Washington, D.C., talking about reform, education, and really how to get it right for every child, which is part of the theme of our conversation this morning.
Getting it right for every child, that's a sweeping statement, isn't it? Tough job.
We don't really have a choice. There's nothing to do if you're undereducated these days. There was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, you could leave school, be a fairly miserable student, and still find your way forward. There was a job in the mill or the mine, in industry somewhere. Those jobs are gone, or if they're not, they will be. So it really is about getting every child educated. It's that urgent.
The best education they possibly can. Now, Finland comes up, and any time, and we were talking about it off air this morning, any time infrastructure, whether it's a great rail network, whether it's a cycling network, whether it's environmental, countries like Sweden and Finland always seem to head towards the top. What are the Finns doing so great in education?
Well, what Finland did several years ago is reinvest in education. They require a master's degree of all teachers, and they paid them to do it. They overstaff classrooms where there's diversity. So in Helsinki, if there's multiple languages in a classroom, they put 2 or 3 teachers, maybe one in special education, one in language, and one lead teacher. We do that here. We call it overstaffing. We can't afford it. They also took away the national tests. They don't.
No tests.
They randomly sample kids purposefully around the different domains because they realized that the pressure of the test actually was getting in the way. They put mandatory musical proficiency of an instrument all the way through year 12. They shortened the school day and the school year. They did kind of the opposite. If you ever saw the Seinfeld episode, Opposite George, it's my favorite. They did the opposite of everything that comes in to most politicians' heads today, and they actually rose to the top of the world.
So the question, just rewinding, getting back to the tests or the exams, how does a student head to university without a yardstick of their scholastic ability?
Well, through the courses they take, those are equated with academic pursuit or vocational pursuit courses. Plus, the best measure of your success in university is actually your teacher-given marks, not standardized tests. The consistent marks teachers give a better record than any test, and
so
they use those.
You're saying we give power back to the teachers and get them to make an assessment of each and every student.
Your grade point average coming out of high school gives you a much more solid indicator than a test does.
I would imagine in Australia that would shake the education system to the foundations, wouldn't it?
It's about our belief whether we're here in a norm reference society where we compare with each other or to a standard of excellence. And if we could try to get every child to that standard of excellence, it'd be good. Right now, we're still comparing that half will do better than the other half, and that leaves a society where half are always going to be on the bottom.
So that's a lot of changes. If we implemented every one of those that Finland's doing, that would be a game changer for the education department and the system. Where do we start then with the kids?
Well, one of the things you mentioned a little earlier to me, Todd, is that Australia is a different context. Finland's a very self-contained nation, not quite as much poverty. It's a little more able to be managed. So is Singapore, so is Hong Kong.
Smaller areas, basically, yeah.
And Shanghai is an aberration in China of a wealthy kind of New York in the middle of all of China. South Korea as well, a little more self-contained. But Canada's done it by not worrying about regulation and worrying about empowerment. They trust principals to make the decisions. So their choices are to get great school leaders in situations where they'll choose great school teachers. They hold them accountable, not in a punitive way. But if the results don't appear to be going and the community doesn't appear to be supporting, they intervene and say, what do you need? Not you're fired. So they assume that the needs of a school aren't the principal's problem. They're the need for the government to provide solutions.
So it's not a cookie cutter solution, basically.
Right. Much more respectful that educators are professionals as opposed to pawns to be manipulated when society thinks it's the issue of the day to be.
And it's easy to bash principals and teachers, really, isn't it? When students don't perform, it's a soft target, basically.
Well, and also the tricky thing is in New South Wales, for example, there's never been better success of the schools in New South Wales than today. Students, teachers, principals have never performed better than they are today. The rules changed, however, as I mentioned earlier. We've got to get everybody successful. It was okay if 30% didn't do well in the past. There was plenty to do in society.
Not anymore.
So now the expectations have changed. Some of the other countries we're competing with have gotten that. They've reinvested in early childhood education. They've invested in mass education all the way through high school. Some things we haven't done, we may need to do. Those pay off many times later on in funding you don't have to put in to remediation, incarceration, or in healthcare.
So you're basically saying get it right from day one, and it will permeate throughout the entire life of the student.
If we fully funded early childhood education for every child in Australia right now, we'd save 6 times the money in healthcare, in remediation, in incarceration, in all our sorts of social needs by building capacity of every child.
Before we let you go this morning, then, major cuts to education spending in the May budget there. On one hand giveth, the other hand taketh away.
It's hard to know whether they'll come forward with the same proposal that fell on its face last year, but it looks like they're holding on to a 20% cut of higher education and allowing universities then to grow that back by raising fees. For a place like the University of Newcastle, the risk is those fees may outprice university education for working class families. That's the risk.
So how do we equate the fact that the government is saying we want an innovative country, we want smart thinkers, we want innovation across the board, yet you're cutting back on education? It's an oxymoron, basically, isn't it?
We actually need to reinvest and get everybody secondary education through TAFE, through university, and through alternative kinds of form of vocational education. We got to get everybody post-secondary. This is not a time to exclude anyone.
I can tell you the TAFE teachers and the TAFE organisation will be putting up a little John Fischetti monument and praying to it in their house. Great to have you back in the country and lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, we'll see the ramifications of this maybe in 2 weeks after the budget comes forward.
Yeah, watch this space. Professor John Fischetti,